Sup? Okay, today I think I'm gonna talk a lot of shit about myself. And well, the point of all this is because I come to realize that I think it's very important that in order to, to teach something or to understand the vision of that person that you are learning from, it's good that you know a little bit of the personal experience of the role, because part of the point of Animawarriors is to be creative from a very, let's say, personal perspective or a genuine perspective. Of course, I'm not going to drive there while I do this, but so the plan of this is, in this series of videos, what I'm planning to do is to show you a little bit of what's been all this journey in all these years, what I've been learning, from who I've been learning, and how all this has helped me to shape the career that I had as an animator, and not only as an animator, but also as a creative person. The point of all this is that you see that all of us, we have a different path, we have a different way to do the things that we do. So it's not that we have to follow an ABC in order to create a professional career path, whatever is dancing or animation or painting. Overall, for creative, like if you think about it, creativity at the end, if you're aiming to create a creative path or a creative career, it should fall also into some kind of a creative way of doing it, no? Otherwise it would be like too mental, too following the rules, and that's not precisely what we want. The point is that as long as you are creating your own creative path that is coming out of your own personal creative impulse, that is coming out of your own personal events in your life, you're gonna be good. It's not that you have to do this and this and that and that and that to get somewhere. Of course, it's not a very easy thing to do. It's not that I've always been doing that. That's why I'm telling this. I've seen myself projecting towards an external income that never end up arriving. And it took me a little bit to realize that what it was really important is to enjoy the creative process itself and see where that takes me. So I don't know, maybe I'm doing this video out of ego, because sometimes there's nothing more fun than talking shit about oneself. Well, I don't know, maybe just to show you the secret, the good carbonara sauce. Though I know that some of my Italian friends would say, ma cream, carbonara no se hace con cream. I don't care, it tastes good anyways. But I hope that at least you get the idea that the more honest you are with your... Yeah, it's hot, eh? I hope that at least you get the idea that the more honest you are with yourself and with your surroundings, including your professional work, you're gonna take decisions that are more, aligned with that, and that's really gonna be benefiting greatly all your career and all your personal life. But yeah, I'm sure you're good, eh? They're pretty good. So for that, I'm gonna be using this evolution reel that I created recently, where I'm basically putting together all my main works that I've been doing in these 15 years of work, or almost 15 years of work. There's a lot of crap. There's a lot of things that definitely, if I would be applying for a job in the studio, I wouldn't be showing. But that's the point. The point is to show and to talk about how I've been progressing in all these years, and how every little step that I took and the people that I've met helped me to get to where I am right now. So before jumping into these 15 years of working in the film industry, TVs and all that, I like to say that before all this happened, I was very lucky to grow up in a family that was very, very into the arts. My mom, she was a musician, and she was an artist. So early in my days, when I was already a child, I got introduced to the fine arts. I was already painting, and pretty close when I was already on my 18, I was starting to let's say, to flirt with clowning, and clowning not the one with the nose, clowning from the sense of spontaneous acting, improvisation, and all that. So that being said, with that, what I mean is that by the moment I started to study animation and do some animation, I was already, let's say, familiar with some artistic crafts or some artistic arts, and some of them, because of the clowning kind of thing, it was already very into being genuine and about being myself and to really express myself and to have a lot of fun while expressing myself. So after studying actually a couple of years of graphic design and a very general introduction into 3D, I did some work in animation, but when I got my first job in Keaton Animation Studio, that was in Valencia in 2006, is when I started to practice and did these first exercises where a lot of things happened in these first years. This first year, 2006, every time I tell this story, I say the same. I was so lucky, so lucky, so lucky that I got this job because I was so bad. I was so bad, but they trust me somehow, and I will be always very thankful about that. And there was already a lot of highly talented people working in that year or in that time in Keaton Animation Studios in Valencia. The studio was run by the Cuevas brothers. They are still running the studio. And I remember that when I took this shot to get some feedback, something that took my attention a lot, which is the very first thing that I learned, was this. I don't know if you can hear that, that's my keyboard. I remember that one of the two Cuevas brothers, they started to do this with the keyboard, forward and backward, and I remember that my world crashed at that moment. Like, what the hell are you doing looking at my shot? Using the keyboard, the arrows, backward and forward, you're supposed to just hit play and see if you like it or not. But that's not true. Really, true animation making and the craft, as I mentioned in the essence, as I always mention, is just the consecution of posing frame after frame, right? So that's what they did. They look at my shot, frame by frame, and they started to give me feedback based on that way of exploring my shot, just by going frame forward, frame backward. They start to talk to me about very precise and subtle things, like about the trajectory that my plate was doing, right, which is an horrendous trajectory, as you can see here. There is no curve, there is like a huge gaps here and there, and that was like, oh wow, so I can work so into the frame that I can actually even pose in each frame. I actually had a lot of fun doing this shot. I jump into this shot that basically, let's say, I think that this is when I was starting to maybe aim to work with Pixar Animation Studios. This shot is highly inspired by one of the early reels from Guillermo Jacinto, which I believe he is still an animator at Pixar. And he had a beautiful shot of a guy typing, and somehow that inspired me a little bit to do something that was expressive enough with the face without any kind of dialogue, and where I could start to apply something that I was learning. Something that back then, and I couldn't see and I can see now, is that definitely the style that I was looking for, or that I was attracted to do, is something completely different than the style of Guillermo Jacinto. That was a pretty solid, kind of like realistically stylized style, like the one they do at Pixar. No, myself, even in these early tests that I was doing, personal shots that I was doing, I was definitely starting to go into something more pushed, more stylized. But my awareness still wasn't, or my eye wasn't still that sharp enough to see that Pixar style wasn't something that It wasn't for me. I mean, it's not for me. After that, we did the shot, and I said we because at Keaton Animation Studio, it was working a very good animator back then already, a Spanish animator called Daniel Peixe. He is now a current animator at Disney, and back then, in 2006, he was already flirting and getting some job proposals at Pixar. Luckily for us, I think that the movie that he was supposed to work on didn't came out, so he didn't actually ended up going to work in Pixar. So he basically found himself trapped in Valencia for I think one or two more years before he could jump into another big studio, which at the end was Disney, right? So for like a year, we had this pretty high-profile animator working with us in Valencia. And Daniel, he's a very nice guy. He took us, like 3 or 4 of us that we were already starting to work in animation. And he proposed basically like a classic mentorship, something that back then Animation Mentor was starting to do. But we did it live, we did it already there in the studio, kind enough and passionate enough towards the animation to offer his knowledge and to offer his craft to teach us all every day. And so we basically did this shot following his steps, almost frame by frame, step by step, following his workflow. His workflow was always very 2D, and that's how I started to understand and to get familiar with the 2D way of working, which is something that I still do. If you are doing the essence or watching some of the other videos, you can see that my workflow is very 2D. I always start working with the core or the golden poses, and from that I start to break. So I remember that his blockings were very amazing, how working on a stepped mode, still in blocking, they had a huge amount of detail. And back then, still in 2006 was when I was starting to get some of my first freelance work. This is one of them that I did for El Ranchito. Again, very lucky because I got this job, and the person who was supervising this work was Kike Oliva, which a little later after supervising this, he would jump into working either for Pixar or for Animal Logic. But he was already a very high-end animator supervising all these works. So another reason to consider myself very, very lucky in this 2006. I did some more job, more personal stuff. Again, this is another acting that I did, aiming for Pixar. I think I realized that I didn't have still that amount of realism in my reel, so I remember not being super happy, not being especially satisfied with it. I think it was kind of okay, and it was kind of easy for me to do it, but it didn't create on me that kind of excitement. I was just doing what I thought that I needed to do in order to apply for Pixar, right? And I thought that more or less you're getting the idea that back then my creative impulse was mainly based in the future external outcome of becoming an animator at Pixar. Something that took me a few years to correct, but this is how everything started. Another shot in the same line, still trying to get more work in order to get more jobs, to keep practicing everything that I was practicing. This shot I like it more, it's more stylized, it's more pushed, more personal. And then I started to do this test because I remember being aware that this shot was, again, a little too pushed, a little too much out of the line of what Pixar may like. So I said, okay, well, I'm gonna do something that still has a lot of physicality and that has something that I really like. And back then I was super into musicals, so I basically took the shot from Singing in the Rain, I believe, where Jen Kelly is dancing in one of these scenes. And I started working on it, and I started doing this vlogging. And at some point was when I started to realize I don't really like this style. I'm like, there's something in here that I'm not enjoying it. Because what I'm more or less doing here, I think, is just copying what is happening in the shot, like getting the reference, not copying, but getting the reference of what is happening in the movie and applying it to my shot in a style that, again, can be a little bit more considered under Pixar style, you know, like this kind of stylized realism. Luckily for me, I didn't end it up because I started to realize that there was something wrong. I couldn't tell back then. I just simply remember feeling very bored, very bored doing this shot. And then this happened. This was amazing. This was of all the lucky events that happened to me in 2006. I would say this is probably the highest. This is Alma, a short film directed by Rodrigo Blas. Rodrigo Blas back then was an animator at Pixar. He collaborated with Keaton Animation Studio in order to make this short film happen. And with this short film, he brought this short film to the studio, and with this short film, he brought a lot of collaborators from Pixar and other big studios. Behind some of the designs of some art of this is Sergio Pablos, is the Grangel studio. The character is designed by Bolen Buchiba. Bolen, he was part of the 2D animators that was in the team of Glenn King back in the 2D animated Tarzans. So this is like a 2D old guy that was reconverted into 3D, working in Pixar, that end up in the city of Valencia, helping a group of young people to improve in order to make this shot or this short film decent enough, because we were all highly inexperienced. So Rodrigo Blas, Bolen Buchiba, some other Pixar animators that came. Jeff Bacanti was another animator that back then was working for, if I'm not wrong, Sony Pictures. Everything was put together for us, right, back then. And we learned so much. I learned so much just in the time that we were working in this short film. When I was working in this particular shot, which as you can see is nothing but just a blur, was when I had the opportunity to sit for a couple of hours with Bolen. And that was the first time when I heard one of the best recommendation of the tips that I heard and that I started to apply since then. And he was drawing, okay, he was drawing in my desk, lots of thumbnails, lots of lines. He was like a very rough animator. In a very thick accent, he said to me, you have to feel your character, you have to become your character. You have to feel your character, you have to become your character. And that stick with me forever, right? The idea of putting yourself into the skin of the character that you are animating become like the main thing to do. And I couldn't tell until a few years later how this tip from Bolen worked out pretty well with everything that I explore with clowning and improvisation in performance and acting and all that. I think this is actually the event that closes 2006. Yes. So lots of things happened in 2006 that definitely helped me to let's say to really work as an animator, to really understand the most important basics like workflow, working the frame by frame, the workflow of 2D animation, the thing of becoming the animator. That all happened in 2006, and I am so thankful that everything happened back then, because the rest of the years I think they are way more boring.